my motivation to keep doing it was not as strong as was my desire to quit it. I understand that if I had kept on it, running regularly, consistently, I probably would have gotten better at it, strengthened my lungs, my legs, had I kept at it in a regular way. I also own a guitar that was played for one summer. I had a decent rendition going of the Indigo Girls' Closer to Fine, but my learning was slow going and tuning it was a disaster. I imagine that if I had stayed with it, I would have acquired some muscle memory and improved, but it was hard, and I stopped practicing. I am not proud of these two vignettes, but they are true, and they are things that I have learned from. Starting something new and exciting is a lot easier than making a regular habit out of it, such that it becomes part of who we are. Last week we read Parshat Teruma about the building of the Mishkan, the tabernacle that we carried through our 40-year journey through the wilderness. And it was fabulous. It was all made of beautiful gold and crimson and silver and gemstones. It was all fire and God's presence and all hands on deck. It was very exciting as a beginning, the spiritual grandeur of it all. But this week, we read Parshat Tetzaveh, which is about the sacred service of the Levites, what they do inside of the tabernacle. If Parshat Teruma is the ecstatic beginning, I'm going to learn how to play guitar. Then Parshat Tetzaveh is the paced regularity of practice. The consistency of showing up again and again at the appointed times to build the muscle memory of ritual and tradition and peoplehood. In his book, The Heart of Torah, Rabbi Shai Held writes about the difference between these two Torah portions and also the need to have them both as we become the Jewish people and begin a relationship with God. He writes, this Torah portion, Tetzaveh, paints a powerful portrait of covenantal mutuality, of God's commitment to Israel and Israel's commitment to God. But it also claims, crucially, that covenantal mutuality depends less on ecstasy than on constancy. We find this tension in the very first verse of Tetzaveh. It says this, V'ata tetzaveh et b'nei Yisrael v'yihu elecha shemen zayit zach katit lamahor l'ha'alot ner tamid. God says to Moses, instruct the Israelites to bring you clear oil of beaten olives for lighting, for kindling the ner tamid. And we have a ner tamid. Every synagogue in the world has a ner tamid. So how do we usually translate ner tamid? Eternal light. Eternal light. That is what we've come to know. But there is a debate about the translation and intention of the word tamid. Midrash tells us that tamid means eternal, never ceasing, and calls it a symbol of God's constant presence. And so to affirm that truth, our job is to never let that light go out. And it's why this is always lit, or plugged in, as it were. But Rabbi Held, backed up by Rashi, demonstrates that the pshat, the plain meaning of this text, of this word tamid, means regularly. Rabbi Yehoyada Amir explains the focus on this commandment is not on keep the light always being aflame, but on Israel's obligation to kindle it again and again. This parsha would teach us that as much as the beginning of something ignites us, there is a necessary holiness to regularity, to doing something over and over, even after the first boom of it has waned. And maybe this sounds boring. I certainly found it very hard to sustain even the things that I wanted and knew were good for me. And yet, there is so much to be gained by the Torah of Tetzaveh, a healthier body that can run comfortably, the music that we can create once we've gotten good. And I'm thinking about this very service and your attendance added. What do we call those of you who come each week or on Saturday morning, here or virtually? The regulars. The Shabbat regulars might come regularly. Last week was the first week that this service happened in this way in 2 years, and the energy was palpable. It was a Parshat Teruma moment. I overheard someone approach an old friend as if with new eyes and say to them, "Hey, how you been for the past 2 years?" Teruma. But Tetzaveh is what ultimately makes this space so powerful. The return to one another each week, the way we greet the Psalms of Kabbalat Shabbat as old friends. You might even have a makom kavua, a fixed place where you choose to sit each week. Even our bodies find meaning in regularity. And if you are not a regular, but just trying it out, welcome. I'm new here too. But I hope that it becomes Tetzaveh for us also, because that's how we come to know one another in this space. How all of this becomes familiar and comforting. In our regularity, we become partners on a journey. We get to be vulnerable, and joyful, and accountable to one another. And that is transformational. And it is not easy. Not only do we get distracted and pulled in so many other directions, but it also takes a kind of spiritual courage to make such a commitment and to believe that that commitment will be returned. Rabbi Held identifies that in our Torah narrative, for all this time in the wilderness so far, we've experienced God's presence by God showing up. And now, Parshat Tetzaveh is this turning point where we experience God's presence by our showing up, which is a risk. To believe that if we show up, God's presence or our community will also show up and be present. It means we have to rely on each other. And it's not just here in this service. This week you might have seen we launched our small groups initiative, a way for us to help us find our people and to make meaningful connections to other CPE members, to join our lives together. The first round of small groups are challah baking, sage elders, gardening, mahjong, Union Temple Legacy Circle, and conversational Hebrew. That last one really makes me sweat when I do it. Very intense, but it's really, really wonderful. And if those are not up your alley, or you have an idea for a different one, we'll help you create that too. These groups will meet regularly. The same group of people over an arc of time, coming to know each other and show up for one another. The launch of this is the Teruma moment, for sure. Very exciting out of the gate. But the spark, the ner tamid of these groups grows as they meet with consistency, building trust, laughing together, telling stories, coming to matter to one another over time. And it takes some courage to be a regular to each other and to say, I want this connection, and to hope that others will keep showing up too. But it could be worth it. To invest in each other like this, it's like the holy service of the Levites in the Mishkan. Rabbi Held writes, for one-time events, one can rely on passion and spontaneity. For enduring commitments, on the other hand, one needs steadiness and steadfastness. Regularity might not be super exhilarating, but it does amplify the light more and more each time. There is one thing I did not quit, even though it was really hard. Community organizing did not come easy to me, but I kept at it regularly, and through it, found enduring, important connections with others. And it completely changed my life. May we each merit the blessing of teruma, passionate, spontaneous, fireworks moments in our lives and in our community. May we also merit the blessing of Tetzaveh, of the life-changing, soul-nurturing, joy-making connections and